In a crowded gym in the late 1960s, a challenge was issued that most believed no one could meet. Bruce Lee stepped forward. Within moments, the room shifted. What followed was not a spectacle, nor a display of strength. It was a quiet inevitability. By the time the seconds had passed, the challenger lay still, and the crowd understood something they had never anticipated. Mastery does not announce itself with noise. It arrives silently and leaves only the consequences. The gym did not announce itself as important. It sat behind an unmarked door, separated from the street by a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant. Inside, the space was practical rather than impressive. Worn mats covered the floor. A few heavy bags hung from beams that had seen years of use. The walls held no posters, no slogans, no mirrors meant to flatter movement. Everything in the room existed for work. People trained there because it allowed them to be unnoticed. On most days, the rhythm was predictable. Shoes left near the entrance. Jackets folded and set aside. A low murmur of conversation that faded as bodies warmed and breathing settled into effort. The room rewarded discipline and punished distraction. No one came here to be seen. They came to practice. Bruce Lee used the space the same way. There was nothing ceremonial about his arrival. He did not gather attention or alter the mood of the room. He moved with the ease of someone who knew exactly how much space he occupied and required no more. His clothing was simple. His manner was reserved. To an outsider, he might have looked like another serious practitioner. Focused, quiet, unremarkable. But those who trained regularly noticed changes when he was present. The room seemed to compress slightly, as if movements became more economical without anyone deciding to make them so. Conversations shortened. Techniques were executed with fewer wasted steps. It was not imitation so much as alignment. His presence imposed a standard without instruction. He began as he always did. Light movement, measured stretching. No rush to exert himself. No audience. His attention stayed inward, tracking balance, breath, and distance. The work appeared modest, even restrained, yet there was a sense that nothing was being withheld. What he showed was exactly what he needed. Others trained alongside him, careful not to interrupt. No one asked questions. That was understood. If something was meant to be shared, it would be shown in time. The gym respected that kind of economy. Outside the room, the world moved as usual. Cars passed. Voices echoed faintly through walls. Inside, the atmosphere remained insulated, almost detached from the day. It was the kind of place where events did not announce themselves as history while they were happening. That morning or afternoon, depending on who later told the story, there was no expectation of disruption. No sign that routine would give way to memory. The gym did not pause or prepare, continued exactly as it always had. Which is why, when the door eventually opened again, the sound carried farther than it should have. Not because it was loud, but because it interrupted something settled. A new presence entered the room, bringing with it a different kind of energy. One less patient, less contained. It was not yet a challenge. Not officially, not even verbally, but attention shifted in small, involuntary ways. Bruce Lee did not look up immediately. He finished what he was doing, exactly as he had planned to do it. And the room, without understanding why, seemed to wait. The man who entered did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His posture carried the announcement for him. Upright, deliberate, with the quiet stiffness of someone accustomed to being measured and to measuring others. He paused just inside the room, allowing his presence to register before moving farther in. It was a practiced instinct, learned in places where hierarchy mattered. Some in the gym recognized him immediately. Others only sensed the shift. He was known, if not by name then by reputation. A fighter with credentials. a practitioner who had tested himself publicly and preferred those tests to end decisively. He had not come by accident. He scanned the room, not rudely, but thoroughly. Training continued, though a half-beat slower than before. No one wanted to be the first to stop. No one wanted to pretend nothing had changed. Bruce Lee remained where he was. He did not acknowledge the newcomer with a glance or a nod. Not out of dismissal, but because his attention was already placed elsewhere. He was finishing a sequence, adjusting his footing, refining something small. The kind of work that looked inconsequential until it wasn't. The challenger moved closer, close enough now to be unmistakably present. Still nothing was said. The silence between them stretched, not awkwardly, but with weight. It was the silence of two different temperaments meeting without agreement on how the moment should proceed. In most rooms, a challenge announces itself quickly. There is a provocation, a story, an explanation meant for witnesses. Here, the language was different. Authority was not negotiated aloud. It was tested by proximity. Someone on the edge of the mat stopped moving altogether. Another leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, careful not to interfere. No one asked what was about to happen. The question had already been answered by the way attention settled into the center of the room. The challenger finally spoke, but not to provoke. It was framed as curiosity, even respect. A question about methods, about effectiveness, about whether certain claims held up under pressure. The tone was controlled, but underneath it ran impatience. A need to resolve something that had been building long before this room. Bruce Lee listened without visible reaction. When he responded, it was brief. Not defensive, not explanatory. He did not argue his approach or justify his reputation. His words did not invite debate. They simply acknowledged the question and removed its urgency. That, more than anything, unsettled the room. Because the challenger had arrived ready for resistance, for friction, for escalation, for something to push against. What he encountered instead was stillness. Not passivity, but composure so complete it offered no surface to grip. The exchange ended where it began. No agreement, no refusal, just the quiet understanding that talking had reached its limit. Bruce Lee returned to his place on the mat. The challenger remained standing, and between them, the air tightened, not with hostility, but with the pressure of two reputations occupying the same space, only one of which seemed entirely at ease. The gym did not formally stop. There was no command, no signal. Training simply lost its momentum. Movements slowed until they no longer made sense to continue. One by one, people stepped back, creating space without discussing it. The center of the room cleared as if guided by an unspoken agreement. No one wanted to interfere. No one wanted to leave. The challenger took a few steps forward, testing distance, testing response. This was familiar territory for him, the moment before things became undeniable. He had stood in many rooms like this one under similar attention. Usually the tension fed him. Usually it gave him clarity. This time it did not. Bruce Lee stood calmly, hands loose at his sides. His posture was neither defensive nor inviting. He did not square up in a way that signaled confrontation. He simply occupied his balance, as though the rest of the room were incidental. What unsettled the witnesses was not what they saw, but what they didn't. There was no visible readiness, no tightening of the jaw, no shift into a stance meant to warn or impress. If anything, Bruce Lee appeared less engaged now than he had moments earlier while training alone. It was as if the presence of an opponent required less effort, not more. The challenger adjusted his footing, then adjusted again. His breathing changed slightly. These were small things, but in a quiet room, they became noticeable. He was preparing, even if he did not consciously decide to. Someone near the wall later said it felt like time compressed. Not slowed, compressed. as though the room was narrowing toward a single point where something inevitable would occur. Still, no challenge was declared. That absence mattered, because once words are spoken, outcomes can be debated. Without them, what followed would stand on its own, without interpretation. The challenger made one last attempt to regain control of the moment. He spoke again, shorter this time, direct, a suggestion rather than a demand, a way to move forward without retreating. Bruce Lee looked at him then, not sharply, not with intensity meant to dominate, just a brief, assessing look, the kind used to measure distance rather than emotion. He nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement that the moment had arrived. No one moved closer. No one reached for a camera or raised a voice. There was a collective restraint in the room, as if everyone understood that whatever was about to happen required no audience participation. The tension reached its limit not through aggression, but through certainty. And in that certainty the challenger stepped in. There was no signal that it had begun. No raised guard. No verbal cue. The challenger's forward movement was subtle, almost tentative, an exploratory step meant to draw a response. In most encounters, that step would have triggered a mirror reaction. Stance against stance, intention against intention. It did not happen here. Bruce Lee moved, but not in a way the eye could immediately catalog. Those closest later struggled to describe it. Not because it was fast, though it was, but because it was economical. There was no excess to follow, no arc to admire, no sequence to memorize. Distance disappeared. The challenger's balance was taken before his body recognized the loss. A shift at the hips, a redirection of force that did not meet resistance head-on. What had been forward intent folded inward, redirected into emptiness. It was over before anticipation could form. 9 seconds was the number people agreed on afterward, though no one had been counting. Felt both shorter and longer than that. Shorter because there was no struggle. Longer because the mind searched for the missing middle, the part where effort should have been visible. The challenger did not hit the ground violently. That detail mattered. There was no punishment in the result, no flourish meant to humiliate. He was simply no longer in control of his own position. The situation had resolved itself. Bruce Lee stepped back immediately. He did not hold the moment. He did not maintain contact or press advantage. The disengagement was as clean as the entry. Whatever needed to be demonstrated had already been shown. The room remained silent. No one applauded. No one spoke. The challenger stayed where he was for a moment longer than necessary, not injured, but reorganizing something internal. When he stood, his posture had changed. The confidence was still there, but it no longer occupied the same space. Bruce Lee offered nothing further. No explanation. No acknowledgement of victory. He returned to stillness, as if the interruption had been minor. As if the outcome had required no special effort. And in that restraint, the demonstration completed itself. Because nothing more could be asked of it. The physical moment had already passed. What remained unfolded more slowly, and far more quietly. The challenger stood, adjusted his clothing, and took a step back. He did not test himself. He did not ask to continue. There was no visible frustration, no outward sign of anger. From a distance it might have looked like restraint. Those closer understood it as recognition. Something essential had shifted. He had come prepared to lose a contest of strength or speed or even endurance. Those losses could be explained. They could be trained against. They left room for return. What he encountered instead offered no such path. There was nothing to challenge again because nothing had been asserted in the first place. The room absorbed this before he did. People avoided eye contact, not out of embarrassment, but out of instinct. They understood they had witnessed something that resisted commentary. Any attempt to frame it would diminish it. The silence was not enforced. It was chosen. Bruce Lee did not look toward the challenger again. That absence was decisive. Had there been acknowledgement, approval, dismissal, or instruction, it might have allowed the challenger to reposition himself within the moment. Instead, there was no role left to occupy. The encounter had ended without leaving a stage behind. The challenger waited, perhaps expecting a closing gesture that never came. When none did, he turned toward the edge of the room. His movements were slower now, more deliberate. Not cautious, considered. He did not announce his departure. He collected his things quietly, nodding once to no one in particular, and left the same way he had entered. The door closed without emphasis. The sound was ordinary. It did not punctuate the moment. Only after he was gone did the room begin to breathe again. Training resumed, but not immediately. People stood where they were, hands at their sides, letting the atmosphere settle. When movement returned, it did so carefully, as though the space itself had been altered and required recalibration. Bruce Lee resumed his practice. He did not demonstrate what had just occurred. He did not repeat it in explanation. If anything, his movements grew smaller, more refined. The focus returned to fundamentals: balance, alignment, control. To someone arriving late, nothing would have seemed out of place. Yet those who remained understood that the gym was not quite the same. Not because of dominance displayed, but because a question had been answered so completely that it could no longer be asked in the same way. The lesson did not arrive as instruction. It settled, unspoken, into the memory of the room. The incident did not travel quickly. There was no official account to repeat, no public challenge to reference, no visible injury to point to. Those who spoke of it did so cautiously, often after being asked more than once. Details were spare. Descriptions varied. What remained consistent was the tone. Quiet, certain, unfinished. In the years that followed, the gym changed hands. Mats were replaced. Bags were rehung. New faces trained where others once stood. The room continued to do what it had always done. Accept effort and return nothing but consequence. Yet the story persisted. It surfaced in conversations between instructors, passed on without names or dates. It appeared as a warning, not a boast. When someone spoke too confidently about testing skill, another would mention a private session, a moment that ended before it began. No one embellished it. There was nothing to add. The challenger was seen again elsewhere in other rooms. He continued to train. He continued to compete. But those who knew him noticed a difference. He asked fewer questions meant to provoke. He watched longer before stepping forward. He had learned something that could not be unlearned. As for Bruce Lee, he never referenced the incident. He did not use it as an example. He did not fold it into instruction. His teaching moved on, focused on efficiency, adaptability, and the discipline of restraint. Students who trained under him later heard fragments of the story only secondhand, often long after they had formed their own understanding of his approach. That absence was part of the legacy, because what endured was not a victory, but a standard. The idea that mastery did not announce itself. That the most decisive moments could pass without spectacle. That dominance, when real, required no reinforcement. Years later, someone would stand in a similar room, facing a similar tension, and choose not to step forward. They might not have known why, but the silence that followed them home would have felt familiar.